What I'm about to tell you isn't some made-up tale, a plot from a late-night movie. This is my life, my truth, and the story of how a secret affair turned an ordinary woman into something I never thought I'd be. The moment I found out about my brother-in-law's secret affair, a cold dread coiled in my stomach, not just for my sister, but for the quiet life I'd built. It was a secret that would unravel everything, twisting family loyalty into a sharpened blade. I never imagined that at 62, I would be forced to pick up that blade myself. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Carol, and for most of my 62 years, I've been the kind of woman people describe as steady. Not flashy, not dramatic, just present. I lived in a cozy, two-story colonial in Willow Creek, Ohio, a town so Rockwellian you'd half expect to see Norman painting a scene on Main Street. My garden, a riot of hydrangeas and hostas, was my sanctuary, and my widowed routine revolved around morning coffee on the porch, tending to my plants, and volunteering at the local library a few days a week. It was a good life, a peaceful one, especially after losing my husband, Tom, 5 years ago. He was the love of my life, and his absence left a quiet ache, but I'd found my rhythm again. The center of my world, outside of my own four walls, was my sister, Susan. Susan, for years younger, was a whirlwind of energy and optimism, a stark contrast to my more introspective nature. She was my confidant, my best friend, and the person who could always make me laugh, even on the darkest days. And her husband, David, was, by all appearances, her rock. David Hayes. Everyone in Willow Creek knew David. He wasn't just Susan's husband. He was a pillar of the community. A successful real estate developer, he'd built half the new subdivisions on the outskirts of town, always with an eye for quality and a charming smile that could disarm anyone. He was handsome, in a classic, salt and pepper kind of way, with a hearty laugh and an easy generosity that made him seem almost too good to be true. He coached Little League, sat on the town council, and always brought the best barbecue to family potlucks. Susan adored him, and honestly, so did I. He was the brother I never had, the one who stepped in after Tom passed, making sure my gutters were cleaned and my car was serviced. He was family. Susan and David's marriage was, to me, the gold standard. They'd been together since college, building a life that seemed utterly perfect. 2 grown kids, a beautiful home by the lake, and a kind of comfortable ease that only comes from decades of shared history. When they hosted Sunday dinners, their house buzzed with warmth and laughter. David would carve the roast with theatrical flair, Susan would fuss over everyone, and I'd sit back, a contented observer, basking in the glow of their happiness. I genuinely believed they had it all. The first whispers of doubt were so subtle, I almost dismissed them as my own aging paranoia. It started, perhaps, 6 months before that fateful day. David, usually meticulous about his schedule, began to be tied up more often. Extra meetings in Columbus, late-night phone calls that he'd take in the study with the door closed, and increasingly frantic energy he'd try to mask with that easy smile. Susan, bless her heart, always had an explanation. He's working on the big Riverbend project, Carol. You know how demanding it is. Or, he's just under a lot of stress with the market fluctuations. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe him. But then came the small, uncharacteristic details. A new, expensive cologne that wasn't his usual subtle scent, a faint floral note lingering on his jacket collar one evening when he hugged me goodbye. He started going to the gym more, not just for his usual morning run, but for evening sessions he'd never bothered with before. He bought a new phone, claiming his old one was acting up, and he was fiercely protective of it, keeping it face down, even at our casual family dinners. He'd even started dressing a little sharper, designer shirts instead of his usual golf polos. I found myself watching him more closely during family gatherings. His eyes, once so open and direct, now seemed to dart around, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Anxiety? I'd catch him staring into the middle distance, a million miles away, only to snap back into his charming persona the moment Susan spoke his name. My gut, that old, reliable internal compass, started to feel a distinct pull, a warning signal I couldn't ignore. I tried to be casual. David, you've been working so hard lately. Maybe you and Susan should take a little getaway. I'd asked him over a cup of coffee one Tuesday morning, after he dropped by to fix a leaky faucet. He'd laughed a little too loudly. Oh, Carol, you know how it is. Building an empire, one brick at a time. He patted my arm, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. We'll get there. Susan deserves the best. It was that line, Susan deserves the best, that truly cemented my suspicions. It sounded rehearsed, a platitude from a man who usually spoke from the heart. Then came the weekend of the annual Willow Creek Heritage Festival. David, as a prominent town council member, was always front and center. Susan was helping organize the bake sale, and I was manning the Historical Society's booth. David was supposed to be giving the opening address, then joining Susan. But he was late. And then he didn't show up. His phone went straight to voicemail. Susan, flustered but still putting on a brave face, explained that he'd been called away to a last-minute crisis at one of his construction sites. He's so dedicated, she'd sighed, trying to convince herself more than me. Later that evening, as I was packing up my booth, I saw him. Not at the festival, but across town, pulling out of the parking lot of the Oak and Vine, a trendy, upscale restaurant often used for romantic dates, not emergency construction meetings. He was driving his black Escalade, and in the passenger seat, I saw a flash of blonde hair, not Susan's familiar brunette. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, and David was smiling, a genuine, relaxed smile I hadn't seen on his face in months. He glanced my way, our eyes meeting for just a split second before he swerved out of the lot, his smile faltering, his jaw tightening. He didn't wave. He didn't even acknowledge me. My heart seized. I spent that night in a daze, the image of David and the blonde woman replaying in my mind. The next morning, a Sunday, David was back to his usual self, bright and cheerful, making pancakes for Susan. He explained his absence from the festival with a detailed story about a burst pipe at a newly finished condo, complete with fabricated names of plumbers and building managers. Susan nodded, accepting it without question. I, however, could only nod and smile, a lead weight settling in my stomach. I felt a pang of betrayal, not just for Susan, but for myself. He'd lied to my face, lied to our family. The confirmation, when it came, was accidental, brutal, and swift. A week later, David was scheduled for a business trip to Columbus. He was staying at the Hyatt downtown for a conference. On Tuesday afternoon, Susan called me in a panic. Carol, David left his tablet at home, and he needs it for his presentation tomorrow. He's too busy to come back, and I have my book club. Could you possibly drop it off for him? Of course, I said yes. Anything for Susan. I grabbed David's expensive leather brief bag, where he usually kept his tablet, and headed out. The drive to Columbus was about an hour and a half. I called him when I was halfway there, but he didn't pick up. When I arrived at the Hyatt, the desk clerk informed me that Mr. Hayes had already checked out that morning. He had an early flight, she said cheerfully. My blood ran cold. Checked out? But he's supposed to be here for a conference until tomorrow. The clerk looked at her screen, then back at me, a hint of confusion in her eyes. No, ma'am. Mr. Hayes checked out at 8 a.m., and his reservation was only for one night. I felt a dizzying wave wash over me. One night? He told Susan he'd be gone for 3. I mumbled my thanks, my mind reeling, and walked away from the desk, the heavy brief bag suddenly feeling like a lead weight in my hand. He'd lied. About the length of the trip, about his location. I found a quiet corner in the lobby, needing a moment to collect myself. My hands were shaking. I opened the brief bag, pulling out the tablet. As I did, a small, laminated key card slipped out from a hidden pocket, landing on the plush carpet. It wasn't a Hyatt card. This one was sleek, black, with the cursive logo of the Rosewood Suites, Cincinnati. Cincinnati? That was over 2 hours further west from Columbus. and tucked beneath it, a folded receipt. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. A dinner bill for two, dated 2 nights ago, from a Michelin-star restaurant in Cincinnati. 2 expensive entrees, a bottle of Chablis Grand Cru, and a line item for a romantic package that included rose petals and champagne in the room. The total was astronomical. My vision blurred. David Hayes, my brother-in-law, Susan's perfect husband, hadn't been in Columbus for a business conference. He'd been in Cincinnati with another woman, showering her with expensive dinners and romantic gestures. The truth hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The steady ground beneath my feet dissolved, replaced by a gaping chasm. My beautiful, trusting sister. My dependable, honorable brother-in-law. The perfect life they'd built. It was all a lie. And now I held the proof. I stared at the keycard, then at the receipt, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was I supposed to do with this? The world had just tilted on its axis, and I, Carol, the quiet woman from Willow Creek, was standing at the edge of an abyss, holding the match that could burn everything down. The keycard for the Rosewood Suites in Cincinnati felt like a burning coal in my palm. The restaurant receipt, detailing a lavish dinner for two and that sickening romantic package, was a death warrant. Not for David, not yet. But for the man I thought he was, for the life Susan thought she had, and for the peace I'd once cherished. I sat there in the Hyatt lobby, my old hands trembling, the elegant, plush surroundings mocking the chaos erupting inside me. Carol, the steady woman, the quiet observer, was gone. In her place, a cold, hard resolve began to form, a steel framework where my gentle heart used to be. I didn't call Susan. Not then. What would I say? Honey, your husband, my brother-in-law, the man you adore, is a lying, cheating scoundrel who's been living a double life in Cincinnati?
No.
Susan deserved more than a panicked phone call in a hotel lobby. She deserved the truth, delivered with precision, like a surgical strike. And David? He deserved to lose everything, piece by agonizing piece. The drive back to Willow Creek was a blur of highway signs and mounting fury. My mind, usually a quiet meadow, was now a storm-tossed sea. I replayed every subtle shift, every half-truth, every knowing glance David had given me over the past months. The new cologne, the guarded phone, the gym obsession, the crisis at the festival. He hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been mocking us, living a blatant lie under our very noses, confident in his charm and our unwavering trust. He was a predator in a tailored suit, and Susan, my sweet, trusting sister, was his prey. I locked David's brief bag and its damning contents in my safe deposit box at the Willow Creek Savings and Loan the next morning. I needed time. Time to think, time to plan. I couldn't just drop this bomb. The fallout would destroy Susan too, and that was a revenge. That was collateral damage. David had to be isolated, his fall spectacular, and entirely his own doing. For the next few weeks, I watched him. I observed him at family dinners, at Sunday brunch, at the occasional town council meeting I now made a point to attend. He was still the affable David, the pillar of the community, the loving husband. But to me, his smile was a rictus, his hearty laugh a hollow echo. I saw the telltale signs of his secret life. The subtle check of his phone when Susan wasn't looking, the excuses for late nights or business trips that now sounded like cruel jokes. My stomach churned, but I kept my face serene, a mask of the old Carol. He never suspected a thing. He thought he was untouchable. Then came the catalyst that pushed me from passive observation to active destruction. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was something far more insidious. Susan had always handled their joint finances, David claiming he was too busy with his projects. But lately, she'd been fretting about dwindling savings, unexpected withdrawals from their joint account, and a sudden, urgent need for David to secure a substantial loan, using their home and Susan's investment portfolio as collateral for a new, unmissable development opportunity. "It's just a formality, Carol," Susan had said over tea one afternoon, her brow furrowed. "David says it's a huge return, but the bank needs more security than usual. He's been so stressed about it. A cold dread seeped into my bones. David, always so careful with money, now suddenly desperate for a risky loan, putting Susan's entire future on the line? It reeked of desperation, not opportunity. My relentless side, the one forged in the Hyatt lobby, knew this was my opening. I used my library access, my quiet reputation, and a lifetime of knowing people in Willow Creek to my advantage. I befriended Martha, a retired bookkeeper who volunteered alongside me, a woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. Martha. I'd begun casually one afternoon. You know David Hayes, don't you? He's such a pillar of the community. But I heard a whisper, something about his new Riverbend development. I hope it's not in trouble. Martha, predictably, leaned in. Trouble, Carol? That man's always been a smooth operator. But I did hear his partners pulled out of that Riverbend project last month. Something about his financials being opaque. Opaque. That word stuck. David's partners had pulled out, yet he was still pushing for this unmissable opportunity, pressuring Susan to sign over their assets. It wasn't an opportunity. It was a desperate attempt to cover something up. I had to dig deeper. I learned to navigate online property records, something the old Carol would have dismissed as too complicated. I spent hours at the library, poring over public filings, understanding LLC structures, and cross-referencing names. I found a pattern. David was creating shell companies, funneling money from profitable projects into these new, vaguely defined entities, often with no clear public record of what they were actually doing. And one name kept popping up as a signatory on these shell companies, Hayes Development Solutions, LLC. But the signature wasn't David's usual elegant scrawl. It was a more feminine hand, bold and sweeping. Then I remembered the blonde woman in the Escalade outside the Oak and Vine. The woman laughing, her head thrown back. The woman in Cincinnati. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. She wasn't just a mistress. She was an accomplice, or worse, a co-conspirator. David wasn't just cheating on Susan. He was stealing from her, systematically dismantling their financial security to fund his lavish double life. He was using her and his family as a personal piggy bank and a shield for his illicit dealings. He was truly hateable. I enlisted a friend from my book club, Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who worked in financial services. I told her a partial truth. I was worried about Susan and David's finances, that David seemed to be taking on too much risk. I showed her the shell company names, the dubious property filings. Sarah, with her expertise, quickly confirmed my worst fears. Carol, this isn't just risky, it's borderline fraudulent. These companies are being used to siphon funds. And that signature, it's not David's. Is Susan involved? No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Susan trusts him implicitly. She signs whatever he puts in front of her. Sarah's face hardened. He's defrauding her, Carol. And anyone else who invests in these phantom projects. The pieces clicked into place. The missing money, the desperate loan, the mistress with a bold signature. David wasn't just having an affair. He was building a new life with another woman, funded by Susan's inheritance, her security, her future. He was planning to leave her, a broken woman, financially ruined. That was a line I would not let him cross. My plan solidified. David, ever the civic leader, was scheduled to give the keynote address at the Willow Creek Annual Business Gala, a black-tie affair attended by every mover and shaker in the region, including local press and potential investors for his new developments. It was his stage, his moment of glory. It would also be his downfall. I gathered my evidence. The key card, the Cincinnati receipt, printouts of the shell company filings, a breakdown of the suspicious transactions Sarah had helped me compile, and, crucially, a photograph I'd discreetly taken of the blonde woman exiting the Rosewood Suites a few days after my Columbus trip, a trip I'd made back to Cincinnati, following a hunch, not for vengeance, but for confirmation. Her face was clear, distinctive, and her signature matched the one on the shell company documents. Her name, I discovered, was Bethany Croft, a former junior associate from one of David's old firms, now his mistress and financial enabler. The night of the gala arrived. I wore a simple black dress, my silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Susan, radiant in a sapphire gown, was by David's side, beaming with pride as he mingled, shaking hands, exuding his usual charisma. My stomach was a knot of ice, but my resolve was unwavering. This was for Susan, for her quiet dignity, for the peace he'd shattered. The ballroom of the Grand Willow Hotel was packed, buzzing with anticipation. David took the stage, the spotlight illuminating his handsome, confident face. He launched into his speech, his voice booming with practiced ease, extolling the virtues of Willow Creek, his vision for the future, and the integrity of his company. He spoke of trust, community, and unwavering commitment. Each word was a fresh insult. As he reached the crescendo of his speech, just before the applause was meant to erupt, I made my move. I didn't cause a scene. I used the power of quiet, deliberate action. I approached the local reporter from the Willow Creek Gazette, Sarah Jenkins, who was seated at a table near the stage, her notepad ready. I'd met Sarah many times through library events and knew she was a sharp, ethical journalist. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice calm, "I have something you need to see. Something about Mr. Hayes's unwavering commitment to this community." I handed her a thick envelope. Inside were copies of everything: the Cincinnati receipt, the Rosewood Suites keycard, the photos of Bethany Croft, the printouts of the shell companies, the financial irregularities, and a summary detailing how David Hayes was systematically embezzling funds and defrauding his investors, including his own wife, to build a lavish life with his mistress. I also included a note: Bethany Croft is not just his mistress, she is a signatory on these fraudulent companies. She is in the audience tonight, seated at table 12. Sarah's eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered from the documents to me, then to the stage, where David was just concluding his speech. The first smattering of polite applause began. "Miss Jenkins," I continued, my voice low but firm, "David is about to sign a loan agreement tomorrow that will put Susan's entire future at risk. He plans to leave her destitute. You have to expose him tonight." Her reporter's instincts took over. She scanned the documents, her face growing grimmer with each page. She looked at table 12, where Bethany Croft, a striking blonde in a shimmering silver dress, was indeed seated, laughing at something a man next to her said. David finished his speech, basking in the applause. He raised a glass, a triumphant smile on his face. "To Willow Creek," he boomed. At that precise moment, Sarah Jenkins, with a sudden, decisive movement, stood up from her table. She didn't shout. She simply held up the keycard and the photograph of Bethany Croft for everyone to see, pointing directly at table 12. Her voice, amplified by the sudden hush that fell over the ballroom, cut through the air like a knife. "Mr. Hayes," she called out, her voice clear and strong, "can you explain why you were registered at the Rosewood Suites in Cincinnati with Ms. Bethany Croft, who is currently seated at table 12, just 2 weeks ago, while telling your wife you were on a business trip in Columbus?" A collective gasp swept through the room. Susan's cheerful smile froze, then slowly crumbled. Her eyes, wide and horrified, darted from Bethany to David. David, still on stage, his glass halfway to his lips, went utterly, sickeningly pale. His triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. But Sarah wasn't finished. "And perhaps you can also explain the nature of Hayes Development Solutions LLC and the suspicious flow of funds from your legitimate projects into shell companies, many co-signed by Ms. Croft, while simultaneously pressuring your wife to leverage her personal assets for a new opportunity." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic whispers that erupted like wildfire. All eyes were on David, now frozen on stage, a deer caught in headlights. His empire, built on lies and deceit, was crumbling before him, exposed in the cruel glare of the ballroom lights. Bethany Croft, at table 12, had gone ashen, attempting to sink into her chair, but too many eyes were already on her. Susan, bless her heart, had turned to stone. Her sapphire gown, once so vibrant, seemed to drain of color. When David finally stammered, This is slander. A misunderstanding." His voice was weak, pathetic. The confident real estate mogul was gone, replaced by a cornered rat. The evening dissolved into chaos. Reporters swarmed Sarah, then David. Investors, their faces etched with fury, began demanding answers. David was escorted away by security, his face a mask of utter defeat and terror, his reputation annihilated, his financial misdeeds laid bare for all the world to see. Bethany Croft, after a brief, tearful confrontation with an enraged investor, fled the ballroom. I watched it all, standing quietly at the edge of the room, an invisible force in a black dress. My heart, once so steady, felt like a block of ice. There was no joy, no triumph, only a profound, chilling emptiness. David Hayes was destroyed. His career was over, his assets frozen, his name synonymous with scandal and fraud. He faced not just financial ruin, but potential legal action. He would lose everything he valued, his money, his mistress, and his carefully constructed image. Susan found me later that night. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen, but there was a flicker of something new in them, a steely resolve that reminded me, chillingly, of myself. "You knew," she whispered, her voice raw with pain and accusation. "You knew, Carol." I met her gaze. "Yes, Susan. I knew, and I made him pay." She looked at me for a long moment, truly seeing me for the first time in months. Not the old Carol, but the woman who had painstakingly gathered evidence, who had watched and waited, who had meticulously orchestrated the public downfall of her betrayer. There was no warmth in her gaze, but there was no condemnation either. Only a haunted understanding. "Thank you," she finally choked out, her voice thick with tears. "You saved me." I didn't hug her. I didn't offer comfort. I simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the terrible, necessary thing I had done. The woman who had once loved her hydrangeas and found solace in her quiet routine was gone. I had stared into the abyss of betrayal, and in fighting back, I had become something else entirely. Something colder, sharper, perhaps even more dangerous. My garden still blooms, the hydrangeas a riot of color, the hostas spreading their generous leaves. But when I sit on my porch now, with my morning coffee, I don't see the peaceful tranquility I once did. I see the shadows, the hidden corners, the places where things can rot beneath the surface. And I realize that while I destroyed David, I also destroyed a part of myself. The steady Carol is gone, replaced by a guardian, a protector, a woman who knows the cost of peace and is willing to pay it. The ache in my heart is no longer for Tom, but for the innocence I lost, and for the chilling realization that some battles, once fought, can never truly be unfought. The end.